Hey, all, today we're going to talk about the 5 ways or the 5 shortcuts to show that two triangles are congruent to each other. And so there are 5 of them, like I said. Most of them postulates. The first one is the side-side-side postulate. So if we have two triangles and we know that all 3 pairs of corresponding sides are congruent, then we don't need to know anything about their angles, and we can say that the two triangles are congruent. So you can see here in these two triangles, I have all the corresponding sides marked to show that all 3 pairs are congruent, and so we could say these triangles are congruent by side, side, side. Side angle side says if we know 2 pairs of sides are congruent and the angles between them are congruent, then we can say that the triangles are congruent. So notice that this angle U and this angle G are between the sides here that I have marked up. And so what we have here is side, angle, side. We have the angle side theorem. So in this one we have 2 pairs of angles, 2 pairs of corresponding angles congruent. So you can see here U and G, T and E. And then we have one of the side pairs congruent that are not between the angles. So between each of these angles and each triangle that I have marked is a side. And so when we have 2 angles, pairs congruent to each other, and then one of those sides that's not between the angles, then we have angle, angle, side. Over here we have 2 pairs of angles and 1 pair of sides, but this time the sides that are congruent are between the angles we're using, and so that becomes angle, side, angle. Notice that the side's between these angles, and in the name, side is between the angles. And then the last way is if we have 2 right triangles, and in those right triangles we know that the hypotenuse of one is congruent to the hypotenuse of the other. Remembering the hypotenuse is across from the 90-degree angle. And then we have one other side in each congruent to each other that we call legs. We call that the hypotenuse leg postulate. So those are 5 shortcuts to showing triangles are congruent. All you need to know are 3 pieces of information, and as long as they create one of those postulates or theorems, then we can say the triangles are congruent. So some things when we're doing this that you need to look out for. I'll start on the right here. Vertical angles. Those are things we've talked about already. If you see vertical angles in a picture, you can mark that they're congruent, just like I did here. Or what we call the reflexive property. In this picture, 2 triangles are right next to each other and they share this side. CD is in both triangles. And so that means that it's going to be the same side, or I'm sorry, same size in both triangles, and so therefore they would be congruent to each other. So whenever we have 2 triangles like this sharing a side, we can put a congruent mark on there and know that in these 2 triangles this side is the same size. So we're going to be asked here which postulate or theorem shows that these 2 triangles are congruent. And so the first thing I'll look for are vertical angles or the reflexive property. I don't see any vertical angles, but I do see that these 2 share a side. And so we'll mark the congruence marks there. So I see 1, 2, 3 pairs of congruent sides, and so we call that the side, side, side postulate. In this pair of triangles, I'm going to look for vertical angles and reflexive property. I see vertical angles. I don't see any reflexive property. It looks like I have one pair, two pairs of congruent angles, and then I have a pair of congruent sides. And those sides are not between the angles that I'm using. So this side is not between the purple and the green dot. This side's not between the purple and the green dot. So we call that angle side theorem. So these two triangles are congruent by the angle side theorem. We'll try one more. Here I have that pair of angles congruent, the second pair of angles congruent, and last I have a pair of sides congruent. And notice that the pink or the purple side is between the green and the blue dot in both of those, and so that's when this becomes angle side angle. So I want you to pause here. I want you to try this one. Figure out which of the 5 shortcuts you can use to show that these two triangles are congruent. So I have reflexive property in this one. These two triangles share this side, and so I'm going to put a congruence mark there. And so I have this pair of sides congruent and this pair of sides congruent. That's two sides. And I have one pair of angles. And notice this angle that I put a green dot is between this side with 2 marks and this side with 1 mark. This green angle is between this side with 2 marks and this side with 1 mark. And so that's what we would call side angle side postulate. So we have plenty of time to work on these in class. I want you to try 3 of them now. I'll answer the questions in class. So I will pause here, let you copy this one down, and then go to the next one.